What's going on, everybody? Hope you are having a wonderful day. Before we start, if any of you want to join my community, a place where we all kind of talk, conversate, I upload free music in there, DJ sets, etc., all on this community. Hit the link in the bio or in the description, and you can all join. If you want to suggest some podcast guests, want to talk about the conversations on the podcast, then there's a podcast channel on there as well. So go check it out, and I'll welcome you in there. Podcast time. This week is a really good one. I say this every week, but this one is a good one. Danny Valentino, DJ presenter from Sirius XM. His show is BPM and Studio 54. I was lucky enough to be invited to be on his show, do a live mix in New York a couple of months ago, and Danny interviewed me, and it was a great chat. Really liked the guy. Obviously, he's been in radio for God knows how many years, over 20 years at Sirius. When somebody's been in the industry for that long, I really want to talk to them and get to know them a little bit more and kind of get some information from them and work out where it all started. And radio is a huge thing for me. Generally, I love radio, and I love hearing the history of radio, and I love hearing people's perspectives that are on radio, as it's very, although it kind of toes the line with what I do and what we do as producers and DJs, it's still a step away from that, and it's a very different industry at the same time. So yeah, I'm going to stop rambling on, but Danny Valentino, enjoy. Danny Valentino, what's cooking, man? How are you?
Doing good. Will Clarke, looking forward to this. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. First time I met you was not so long ago, actually. It was in Sirius Studios. We were doing. I was being interviewed by you on your show, BPM.
I have to say this is a little bit uncomfortable for me because I'm normally not on this side of the conversation. So a little bit, unusual on this side. So if I turn this around and start asking you questions, I'm just going to apologize right off the bat, just force of habit.
No, I'm here for it. I totally understand, because I think when it's a really interesting dynamic, right? When I think for me as well, especially where I have the podcast now, so I'm used to asking questions, and realistically, the podcast is like a little bit more conversational, and you kind of guide it to different ways. But it's very interesting when you, like, for me, when I start getting interviewed now, it's like I almost kind of want to push it to a different direction, or like start asking other questions, or like ask the interviewer questions back, because it just feels normal as a normal conversation, right? It's not just one way, which is kind of like how most conversations go in real life. But when you start getting interviewed, it's just people just asking you questions, and it's a weird concept.
Was this something here I go already? I have a question for you, but we know you for playing your music, but the podcast side of it, and wanting to explore other people's lives, for example, is that something that was always fascinating to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I always, like, growing up, Zane Lowe was like one of my absolute idols on radio. Obviously the BBC is, growing up in England, the BBC is like iconic for radio, as I'm sure you're aware. And I used to listen to Zane Lowe interviews all the time. And at that time, I was young. So I was always really interested in artists' careers, but I feel like there was never really a platform for it. On a long form, I always felt like Zayn would be the one that would only do like long form interviews. And then I used to have a radio show, and I'll be totally honest, I really disliked doing mixes. Like when I'm not DJing, I'm not a huge fan of doing mixes just to play out to the radio. It was just, for me, it was just like took time that I didn't enjoy. So during that radio show, I had an interview section, and I always enjoyed the interview section and wanted to drag it out longer. But I'd never really made the time to do it. So then when the pandemic hit in March, April, I started the podcast and just kind of started the whole long form conversation. And I think we don't get to do this. You and I are probably going to talk for longer in person than what most of our conversations are going to happen today or for the next month, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's really important that people communicate like one-on-one with no distractions, no phones going off, no emails going off, nobody coming in the room and asking you questions and things like that. I think it's just really important. We just don't do that nowadays.
It's just difficult. I mean, think about the times when we're going to have a conversation, right? You'll come into the studio and, we'll have a certain amount of time in that studio where we can do the interview before we're going to have to move on and somebody else will come in. Or we'll see you at a festival and there's all sorts of stuff going on around us. And you have 10 minutes before you're set and you can sit down with me for 5, or we have you scheduled for 4:00 and then, somebody else is coming in at 4:20. So I think I think it's a great point. I think life is fast, but especially in our universe,
Yeah, but I also think it's that kind of whole situation is like you said, we're all kind of passing ships in the night. Even the artist side of things is like you see your mates. Very rarely do we get to sit down and have a conversation. For the only time we really get to have a conversation is at dinner or in the airport, realistically. Unless you're really close and you're chatting on the phone, but still then there's distractions. Still then you're kind of walking around the house doing things. You got other emails you're replying to whilst you're on the phone. It's for me, it's just like a podcast is just a very one-on-one situation where other people can listen in, and it's a strange concept, really. People just listening to hear you talk without. Because obviously we all grew up with radio. Radio is a part of all of our lives, and it still is. But podcast is just slightly different. How do you find podcasts? For you being an interviewer, do you listen to them?
Do I listen to them? I do. I mean, it's just I don't have the time, like you're saying, to sit normally and listen, especially if it's longer form. I'll have to kind of break it up if I have 30 minutes here on a train ride, if I have a little time in the car. But I do enjoy getting in the weeds. I listen to, several different ones. I try to listen to some, Joe Rogan, for example, that's long form. I think that's new. Being able to sit with a conversation like that. We have Howard Stern here at Sirius XM, who also does long form interviews. I think he's very good at it. You mentioned Zane Lowe in the UK. I'd, argue that Howard here in the UK has been doing that for a long time. I think he's one of the best interviewers that I've ever heard, and he's very good at getting people to say things that maybe they wouldn't say to somebody else. So, but it's very difficult sometimes to just sit and listen to all that in one sitting, right? You kind of have to break it up a little bit. But I think there's a definite place for it, and there's a need for it in today's world. Sometimes to maybe like we're doing right now, turn off the notifications for an hour or so, and just kind of focus on talking about things, maybe, reminiscing about some fun stories, or just, talking about music in general.
Yeah, I think it's also for me is we live in quite a lonely world now, or isolated world, where you can be around a lot of people but not know anybody, or you can be spending a lot of time by yourself. And I think having radio, podcasts, just anything to listen to with a human being kind of talking is very comforting. I know during the pandemic I spoke to friends that have been that are DJs in at Radio 1 and Kiss in the UK, and they mentioned during the pandemic and they were still presenting, it was a huge part of the community of people listening to the radio and not being alone and not feeling alone.
It was such an incredible time because at the beginning of that, I mean, you think about, what we're doing as presenters or hosts, it's a lot of what we're talking about is I went to this festival, or, you're talking about an artist who just played in Ibiza, Las Vegas, or, Oscars coming up, and then that was all taken away. But like you say, once you kind of took stock of what the future was going to be, at least the immediate future, I think it did bring the community closer together in a way. And I think social media was a big part of that, because you're talking on the radio and people are listening to you, at least for what we're doing at Sirius XM all across the country.
Yeah.
And we're still breaking the new music, and we're still we did something which I thought was pretty cool. It was the virtual disc dance festival, where we put together a mini festival where I know you would hate to do these things, but we asked the DJs to send in mixes, and we created our own weekend festival. We did the interviews over Zoom. So we were, I think, doing our best to, have some semblance of normalcy during that time.
Totally.
And, I kind of felt the community really come together, at least in that sense, because there was nowhere to go, right? But if you could listen to the radio and you could hear a set from Clarke, you could hear a set from Tiesto or whoever else you may want to hear, at least for that weekend, it kind of felt like, hey, this is cool, this is somewhat normal. And that's what I love, I think, about being on the radio too, is like just being able to have a continuing conversation with the audience. And that's a big part of my job, is like knowing what's happening in the world, and they look to you not just to play the music, but also to be topical and to be talking about things that are relevant in the scene. And I love that conversation. And to me, that's a two-way conversation, because I talk about it, and then through social media, they can react and respond to what I'm saying. And that's one of my favorite things about being a presenter on the air.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I guess it sounds kind of a bit strange, but I do feel that radio is a public service to a certain extent, and I think we've all grown up around radio. Have you found in the last few years with streaming and everything like that change how you guys do radio, and how you guys? Do you feel there's more competition with radio, or how do you feel about all of that?
I mean, I think there's other places for people to get music. And when I first started out at Sirius, which incredibly was, I guess, 20 years ago at this point, it was even before the merger, right? So there was a Sirius, and then there was XM. And we didn't have that streaming, right? Yeah. So, and it was great for dance music, because the idea of a 24/7 commercial-free dance channel here in America was like, whoa, right? A couple of cities maybe locally had, commercial dance channels, I think New York and Miami, but for the rest of the country, they didn't have any of that. Yeah. So that was kind of a cool thing when we started out. That was new. But over time, of course, you get competition, you get the streaming, and it's different, right? Because you can put a playlist together, or somebody can curate a playlist, and you can go listen to that. But I think there's people who enjoy hearing a dance team, an experienced dance team, cover a festival. That's something that maybe you can't get on a streaming service, or to be able to to talk about the stuff that's behind the scenes with regards to the song. Like if you put out a new song, I can have you on for 15 minutes to talk about the song. Like you can't really get that with streaming. So I think for somebody who wants to maybe learn a little bit more about the music, I think radio gives you that. Whereas, the streaming to me can be, it's great for a background if I'm in the car, but it can be cold because, you don't get that same sense of like being a part of something, I feel like, on the radio. But sure, there's a lot of other places now people can go for their music, and that, I guess that's a natural with anything, I think, over time, right? You do something, and then somebody's going to develop something to either, compete with it or change it or give somebody else another option. And, I think people having choices is good, but, I still think that, being able to talk about it and doing things the way that we do it is unique.
Yeah. When growing up for you, when getting into radio, how much of an influence was it on your life? Like, did you grow up in New York?
I did.
Yeah. So radio back in the day was huge in New York. It was kind of like I don't fully know all the history about it, but I have spoken to many people, and radio was like a big part of New York culture.
Without a doubt. Z100,
Yeah.
even 95.5
Mm.
WPLJ, which, a little side note, was actually my first ever radio experience.
Yeah.
Still early on in college, and I did an internship there, but it was fantastic. You can call it the golden age of radio almost. And I can, name some of the DJs that I listened to growing up still to this day, Jack the Whack, Kid Kelly, Elvis Duran, of course, who lasted a very long time. Just off the top of my head, those come to Al Bandero. It was amazing. And the radio DJ was a superstar in New York. The radio DJ was the one that was going to clubs, and people were going out to see the radio DJ host the night. They weren't even playing the music. They would get on the mic for 15 minutes, play a game or, do a body shot contest or something and, throw some t-shirts out to the crowd and, get paid a pretty nice amount of money to do that. And, some of the stories you'd have from those nights, but that was a big part of New York life. And that was my first experience actually in radio, was doing stuff like that, answering phones for those DJs, throwing those t-shirts out on stage. And, kind of was very, very interesting to me. That was my first couple of times doing nightclub experiences and just seeing the excitement around that. But my goodness, like some of those old New York air checks. I used to listen to the I think it was called the High Five at 9 on Z100, the 5 hottest songs in New York at the moment. And all I wanted to do was be a guest DJ on that and introduce one of the songs. I guess it was in my blood from an early stage. But that was. I don't want to date myself, but I guess if you know some of the DJs I mentioned, you could probably figure out around the time that I was, having that experience.
Probably work it out. Yeah, because I guess radio's changed over the years to how it is today. When you first got into radio, how was the culture?
It's how best to say this. I mean, it's changed, but I first got into radio. So the first station that I really, spent some time at was 103.5 KTU in New York City. And I look back at that as some of my, fondest years in radio, because that was a dance channel in New York, for those who may not know. And that was a station that was around during the 1970s and was a #1 station in New York, and then came back in the mid to late 1990s. And there hadn't been a dance channel in New York in, 20 years. And it was incredible. Went to #1 immediately, right in New York, and the events that we were doing, just kind of captivated the city. We did a Saturday Night Fever party, I remember, at the original club where they shot the movie. And we had some of the stars from the movie come back, but it was just like all this like storybook stuff, and it was in Page Six. And radio culture to me has always been exciting. And the people that you work with personalities. Like, I've had corporate jobs, I think, like many people have, and I think the people that you meet in your years in radio, full of stories and just full of, just people who have things to say. It's a very interesting, as I'm sure place to be in music and in radio. And has the culture changed a little bit? I mean, maybe it was a little bit more freewheeling back then. Maybe it wasn't as corporate. Maybe you were able to say, a little bit more, at least on regular radio. That's one of the things I cherish about Sirius XM, is that no filter. If I want to, use a 4-letter word, I can do that. But, try doing that on a regular radio. It's like you can't. So it's like you have to kind of reinvent what you knew about, doing your show. Like, I want to say, like, can I use a 4-letter word?
You can swear.
Yeah, you can, say, like, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Can't say that on regular radio.
Yeah.
And it's real. That's raw. We'll play the unedited versions of songs, whereas, regular radio can't do that.
I want to go back to that. Why is Sirius like that? How have they got around that?
Well, I think because it's probably because it's behind a paywall, right?
Yeah.
So I think that might be the difference. I think when you're owned by a major corporation, like many of these terrestrial radio stations are, you're governed by the FCC, and I think you
Yeah.
have a little bit more, to be concerned about. So, and I think that was one of the major appeals for Howard Stern when he came over to us also. I
Yeah.
mean, the idea to be able to do his thing uncensored. So,
Well, he was a huge
appreciate that.
leader of back in the day of like pushing radio culture forward with interviews, and he would do crazy shit online or on air, and he got away with a lot of it, and he didn't get away with a lot of it as well.
I mean, the movie Private Parts, I thought, was a pretty good depiction of what his life was like. But
I've not seen that.
He was. It's very good. I mean, I know he can be polarizing. Some love, some not for them. But I think everybody who's seen that movie has come away saying it was really good because it was a true look at what he went through, and he. Shock jock was I guess the term that they gave him, and he came out to the was it the MTV Awards or something as Fart Man, and he wore that costume on national TV. But he certainly has developed quite a following over the years, and he did stuff that maybe people would dream of doing on the radio, but he was the one that actually did it. And the stuff he did back then, I don't think a lot of it you could get away with now. You talk about how the culture has changed.
Yeah,
I think there's a perfect example of it. But that back then, that was that was. I don't even know if acceptable is the right word to use, but that was what people did for entertainment in many ways. Right.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think as even films now, like they don't make films. I know I sound like an old man, and I'm not an old man, but like a lot of things were way more acceptable in the early 2000s, in the 90s, in the 80s, but what compared to what it is now. And I think that of course there's things that 100% weren't acceptable if you look back, and there are some things that technically could be if people weren't so sensitive. But I think it does change how we consume media. It does kind of what's the word? It's like you put a filter on yourself sometimes, and I think you do have to be careful with what you say, and you do have to. You're a public facing figure, so you do have to be careful in your everyday life and everything like that, because you just never know. Do you ever struggle with that, like being such a face forward person to the public, being on radio?
I think you get used to it, but you do, I never saw the value in, kind of talking about a polarizing issue to a full-on audience. First of all, when I turn on the radio, I'm turning it on for an escape from the everyday, right? Because there's a million places I can go if I want to talk about whether it's politics or social issues or anything like that. When I'm listening to music, I don't want to hear that, right? I want to shut all that away. So the last thing I want to do is start talking about something that might upset somebody.
Yeah.
So it's actually not been so much of a struggle for me, because that's just not anything that I really want to talk about. I'm trying to keep it fun. I want people to have a good experience and just be able to tune that out, whether it's 15 minutes or if they have an 8-hour drive in the car. I think that, it is a different time, I think. And you do, if you're going to touch on, a sensitive issue, you definitely have to, watch what you say, because sure, we've gotten the internal emails because some people, kind of get offended a little bit more easily these days. Yeah. So for me, it's just always been, I just want to talk about the fun stuff. I don't want to, worry about something that might, get somebody, upset or offended.
I totally agree, and I think I'm very similar, especially on like social media and anything like that. I pretty much refuse to talk about anything political, or just anything kind of controversial, unless I feel extremely strong about something. But there's never really been anything that I feel extremely strong about that I feel like I have to talk about, because I feel like if people actually know you as a person, they know your views, they know everything that you kind of, your morals, and I think you're right. People come to us as escapism. They can go get everything else from anywhere else on on social media. They're literally one swipe down to get that from somebody else. And there's a big, I don't know, I had a heated discussion with a friend of mine about posting political stuff on my social. They asked me to start to like tell people to go vote and tell people who to vote for and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, no, people come to see me. People come to my feed to see what I'm doing, not for me to tell them what to do. And I feel very strongly about that. And it's also in dance music. I feel that we are trying to create an escapism from reality, whether that's on radio, whether that's in a club, whether that's with the music that when people are listening. And I think that's super important to kind of keep that. I really struggle when artists kind of go on this like political journey or whatever journey that is of trying to kind of push their followers to do something that at the end of the day, your followers, you don't know, all your followers don't think the same. We're all human beings. We all have our own opinions. And I feel like you're alienating certain people that may come to you as an escapism and may come to you as some sort of therapy in a lighthearted way. And then they see that you think complete opposite of them, and you're kind of alienating your fan base as well. It feels wrong.
I completely agree. And I like what you said about dance music too. I mean, I think the fans of this genre are, I've worked in other genres of music. I've done, pop earlier on and things like that. And fans of dance music are very passionate and very community oriented. And if you've ever been to a show or festival, you can feel that. And, I think my job is to kind of cultivate that and to bring the people together. Like we play a role, and like when, for example, very difficult time, but when Avicii passed away, that was a devastating thing for many people in the dance music world. And that was, for me, I look back at that particular day because we all immediately went live on the radio to talk about it. And we had artists calling in, we had fans calling in, and we were just playing his music. And this went on for the afternoon and into the night. And I mean, that's the news that we're going to talk about. That's going to be our role as like bringing the community together. We had Laid Back Luke come on, who was Avicii was his protege. We had, the Chainsmokers and Tiesto, and there's all the big people that you would want to talk to. And then we had fans calling in who were crying, and it was an emotional day for all of us. But we're not going to offend anybody doing news like that. That's the type of news I think people want from us. Like, like you're saying, people are saying sometimes, use your platform, tell people to go vote, tell people to do this. I'm like, you know what? They hear that, 98% of the time throughout the day, every publication they pick up or every other channel they pick up to listen to. So at least from my perspective, that's not an avenue I want to go down. But if it's a music related issue, if it's an artist passing, if it's, something that happened at a festival, we had, Electric Zoo was traumatic a few years ago. We had, I think a couple of people passed away at the festival and overdosed, and, or various artists who, Pierce Fulton is another one who, passed away young. Like, that's where I think our value can be, and like giving the fans an outlet to talk about and communicate on social media. Because like you said earlier, with the way the world is now, you can feel alone, even if you're around a lot of people at a festival. But if you kind of feel like you're getting that one-on-one from that voice on the radio that's talking directly to you, that can, make a big difference for somebody.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I want to know a little bit more about your history, and I'm sure people do as well. How did you get into radio? How did it all start for you?
How did it all start for me? So let me ask you a question. We'll edit right here. Somebody just started doing some landscaping outside. I don't know if you can hear that coming through.
No, it's fine. We don't need to edit. It's absolutely fine. I can't hear it. You're good.
Okay, perfect. How did I get into radio? So always grew up listening to radio, and I think my first thing I mentioned earlier was an internship at WPLJ in New York City. So I did some terrestrial radio internships, and the first one that really had an impact on my life was with 103.5 KTU in New York. I actually met some of the people that I currently work with now at Sirius XM at that internship.
Oh, wow.
And that's one of the things I'll tell you if you work in the industry. It's like you end up working with a lot of people 2 and 3 times. It seems like it's such a vast universe of people, but it's not. It's a really close network. Yeah. So, you want to try to build some good bridges. But so I was answering phones for some of the DJs, which was, taking requests. And then that was, I guess, part of the music research to see what people wanted to hear and which songs were doing well and which songs weren't. We would go out to clubs and we would, help the DJs. Whether it was, like I mentioned earlier, throwing out T-shirts or, just being a part of the club night. But I kind of came to the realization that I didn't want to be helping the DJs. I wanted to be the DJ. Yeah. So I figured I had some really great people to talk to at New York, which was, market one here in America. So let me try to learn from some of these people. And they gave me some pointers on how to put together a good demo tape. And I remember, kind of being a little bit, had to learn it was reel to reel. Again, not to date myself, but those are the things we were using back then to
put
these things together.
You dated yourself already.
But yeah, I sent some tapes out. I got an opportunity to do, a middle of the night graveyard kind of shift at a station in a small town in Connecticut. And I remember driving up there, and it was like 2:00 in the morning, and this place looked like a small little house, like in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, this is what radio is like outside of New York, and I go in there, and some guy's like, all right, good luck. And I could kind of, I'm all of a sudden I'm in this radio studio that is live on the air by myself for the first time, middle of the night, and trying not to completely freak out. And of course I played the wrong song. My first talk break, I queued up the wrong number, and like, nope, this doesn't sound like a Matchbox 20. So it was there was a lot of that at the very beginning. So, as with anything, over time, you get a little bit more comfortable with it. And even got to do a few shifts, at KTU, very early in the morning when, probably most people were still sleeping, but it was, a good opportunity for me. And so I started in, we call it terrestrial radio, right? Here in America, there's satellite, which is what I do now. And then there's terrestrial, which is, with more commercial based. So that was my background, actually, was doing, I guess, some pop music and terrestrial radio. And then I guess when Sirius started in the early 2000s, I got a call to ask if I wanted to be a part of the dance station there. And I jumped at it. And that was 20 years ago. And I think of how things have changed, particularly in dance music, from when I first started. But I guess we can get into that, a little bit, later in the conversation. But it all started with, as far as on the air goes, playing the wrong song in the middle of the night at a small place in the middle of Connecticut. So all things considered, I think I've done okay from there.
Totally. No, it sounds amazing. I want to talk about the whole choosing records to play, because it's very different in the US than it is in America, than it is in the UK, from what I gather and from what I've been told. How does the whole radio plug-in and getting your music played on radio work from a terrestrial and to satellite? Like, what's the two differences, or is there not?
So as far as the satellite goes, I'm more of like on the air side of it. So I don't do much of the programming. Yeah. So that's a different team. I just come into the studio and the music log is pretty much ready for me. And as a presenter, I just kind of need to see what I'm going to be playing and be knowledgeable to talk about it. Yeah. I have some music director experience on the commercial side of it. And, I could tell you it was competitive, right? We would have, a music day every week, and the representatives from the different labels would come in and they'd be pushing their latest song or their latest artist, and they would play the record for you. And then you would have a weekly music meeting with, other members of your staff. It was usually just me and the program director at the time. And, we would make a decision. I was always, even on the pop side of it, trying to push an extra dance record or two, but it was very slotted, right? There was maybe only, I can speak on the dance music side, there was maybe only room for, let's say, 2 or 3 dance records at the time to go into rotation.
Yeah.
It was very, very slotted. And, maybe another conversation we could have, later on, or even a different point, just the methodology of radio sometimes is I've sometimes struggled with it, because I feel like, as a heavy listener, and I guess I'm not the one that would be programmed to, but I feel like some stations, you hear the same 5, 7 songs over and over again. But the methodology is, and I guess I understand this, is the average person is listening for only a set period of time. And when they put the radio on, they want to hear the hits. But the person who I guess loses out then is the heavy listener, who maybe wants to get a little bit deeper in the weeds.
Yeah.
So as far as commercial radio goes, you don't really get much of an opportunity to do that. With Sirius XM, at least, we have our niche channels, and you can have channels that will do that for you. And I think there's like 10 different BPM channels, for example, right? You can get your BPM workout music, you can get BPM instrumental, BPM new music, and that, I think people who are core fans, I think, can certainly appreciate that a little bit.
Yeah, it must be tough because there's only a finite amount of time. Let's say, for instance, your radio show is 2 hours long. You only have 2 hours worth of music to play, and there's literally the world of music to play. Like, you could literally play you could play forever and constantly play new music.
It is difficult. I could tell you, I also host a show on Studio 54 Radio called The New Disco Hour. And that's a 60-minute show. And there's only 1 hour in there, and that's on once a week. And there's a lot of music in that genre that we would like to be able to put in. But, how many songs can you play in an hour, right? 12 or 13 songs, and that's it. So, from that angle, for sure, it becomes challenging. And sometimes you have to push something, till next week. And then, maybe a couple songs come out during the week that even push that one further back. So it is a little bit of a challenge, especially when you're time constrained like that.
Is that very disco orientated, Studio 54?
Sure. Yeah. That's, it's kind of a tribute to the nightclub. And I think they actually own the license on the channel.
Oh, really?
So it is affiliated with the official, iconic place. So it's all 70s and 80s dance music for the most part. We have a couple of weekly mix shows that are featured on there. And then I host this New Disco Hour, which we started several years ago, because anybody who listens to music, I think today, you can see there's a lot of disco influence in the sound. And even you get a lot of mainstream artists, Kylie Minogue, Dua Lipa, for example, who are, even Lizzo to a degree, bringing that sound into their music. And we thought it would be cool to create maybe a little bit more of a current-based show for that channel. And the ability to feature, some of these modern artists playing disco. And we've had some guests on that show, some of today's artists. We've had Kylie Minogue, we had Adam Lambert on recently, who just did a really nice cover of Sylvester's You Make Me Real, along with Sigala. Idina Menzel, the Broadway queen, is putting out an album, and it's going to be a disco-based album. Wow. And, to hear the enthusiasm that they have to talk about this is pretty cool. Steve Angelo's new song, actually, we just featured on the show last week, and he's sampling a Carrie Lucas song from the late 1970s. Yeah. So the impact that disco had and is still having on music is pretty amazing for such a controversial genre, if you will, considering how it, rose and fell so quickly during its day.
Yeah, it's interesting how big it was, and also how much it's being sampled now. I listened to, my manager sent me a really interesting podcast about the industrial sample revolution. No, the industrial sample complex. And the theory was based on how we all like to hear something that's not new, that we can all relate to and that we've heard before, and how multiple artists are sampling way heavier than they used to, because there's a lot of big investment companies that are buying old catalogs and that are making it very easy for you to use their samples, because they make money out of it. Whereas during the early 2000s, it was very hard to sample because it costs so much money. For example, they use like De La Soul, like most of their music was not allowed to be released because it was all samples, and they couldn't get any of it cleared up until recent days that it's now gone on streaming. But what's your thoughts on music, the music scene now in electronic and in the disco side of things, where you're hearing samples that you grew up with and now they're being turned into modern day records? What's your thoughts on it? Do you think it's a positive, or do you think it's a negative?
I think if it's done well, I definitely think it's a positive. I mean, that's a big part of what we're doing on that show. But with that being said, if you're going to take on an iconic song, you better do a good job with it,
Yeah.
right? But I do think it's a net positive because I think it's a great way to introduce an entirely new generation of fans to an iconic song. So it's like you're taking that song and you're kind of maybe, adding a little extra beat to it, or, if you keep the integrity of that song, but you kind of match it with the 2023 dance floor, I absolutely think there's a place for it. We've had Kygo do it brilliantly, I think, the past couple of years. What he did with Tina Turner, What's Love Got to Do with It? What he did with the Whitney Houston, Higher Love, which was, is still huge and still gets, people excited. He did it with, it was S.G. Lewis that did it with the Bee Gees, More Than a Woman, which was a huge deal, because for the Bee Gees to, agree to let anybody do a sample of their sounds, it was a huge deal. And he pulled that off. So I think if it's done well, I think there's a lot of value to that. And, you're seeing it not just with pop songs, you're seeing it with hip hop songs too. I mean, a lot of people have taken those 90s and 2000s hip hop songs that were so popular, turning them into dance tracks. And I don't call myself a DJ, not in the, the realm of what you do, but I do play a lot of corporate events, and, when I'm playing, remixes of the songs that people know, to your point, people like to, get down to something that they're familiar with. That's oftentimes can be the most popular part of the set, is when I'm playing those remixes of the Snoop and the Dr. Dre stuff. And I absolutely think there's value in that. But I'd be curious to, from your perspective, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Do you find that, that kind of stuff works? Do you find that there's a place for that in music?
I 100% think sampling is key in dance music, in all music. We all sample from some point, right? If you know what I mean, like house, techno, all comes from disco. Disco comes from blues. Like it's all being sampled or recreated at some point. Some of my biggest records have samples in, big samples in. My record Hallelujah is a sample of Candy Staten. And I think the original came out in the 70s, I believe. I do struggle with how samples are being used today at this moment in time, where it's almost this is the only way music can get through to the fan base, and this is the only way, not the only way, but like if you create an original record without a sample, an original song, and then you create a record with a very big sample in, the record with the very big sample is probably going to be more successful than your original record. And that's purely because we live in the day and age of we need to get your attention very quickly. And of course, we've heard whatever this record, Kylie Minogue, Get Me Out My Head. We all know that record. So there's a slight relationship in our brains that, okay, we can kind of digest this. It doesn't take any brain power to digest that. This is an edit of this, if you know what I mean. Or like Benny Benassi, Satisfaction. Classic example. Like, how many times has that been redone? Because it was a huge hit, if you know what I mean. But also the Benny Benassi was an original record at one point. And that's the thing that I am kind of struggling with a little bit now as a producer, that the barrier of entry to be a successful producer. I'm not talking DJ because that's completely different career, but producer is like, it's very low, and it's made very low because the sampling is not actually that intelligent. That's for me, it's more so we're making a bunch of DJ edits rather than we're making actual records. Like for me, an actual record is like you're writing songs, you're writing melodies, you're doing all of that. Whereas sampling takes out all of that. You're using somebody else's melody, you're using somebody else's sounds, and then just creating it in a DJ edit, a bootleg, a white label, as what we used to call it. But now that's turning into original records. It's tough because it's like I see the pros and I see the cons, and I battle with myself every day. Classic example right now, and I don't want to annoy anyone. There's a Sub Focus record, a Skrillex and Boys Noise record, and a Clooney record that all came out within a month of each other, and they're all using the same sample.
That's happened a few times over the past year as well.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder, how does that happen? Like a song that hasn't been around for, let's say, 30 years, and then all of a sudden you get 3 people doing the same sample, like you say, within a month. Like,
right. I think
are they working with the same team and they all get the idea? Like, I always wondered, how does that work?
I think what happens, one person hears it, one person does it, and then multiple people hear it and go, "Oh, I want to do one like that." And generally the bigger artist can then go get that sample cleared way quicker than the smaller artist because they've got major record labels involved, or they're just a bigger artist, and it gets done, and then everyone gets cleared around the same time because the original artist is like getting a bunch of offers in. The original artist is getting paid, which I'm all for. But then they all come out at the same time, and then it's like, well, hang on, now you've just got 3 remixes in the grand scheme of things. And generally the original artist that did the idea is the one that's going to be less successful from it, because the bigger artist will always be a little more successful. So it's a really strange time, and I kind of, there's a lot of like scenes at this moment in time that, for me, is just like, it's not really pushing the boundaries of making music. And I don't want to sound like a bitter old man or anything like that, but the way streaming is, not necessarily radio, but the way streaming is, it kind of pushes you to that direction to have a successful record by just using a sample. It's strange.
To build off that a little bit, like you kind of talk about, maybe the changes in the way music is being produced today. Artificial intelligence is something that, and I'm interviewing artists a lot, and I'm talking to people, and I know people have mixed opinions on it. Some of the things that we've seen from it are pretty exciting. I know David Guetta, for example, created an Eminem vocal that he then put a house beat over and played it out in the club and put the video up, and people went crazy. And you get these really creative people who are taking the vocals of dead artists and bringing them back. Or I think we had Frank Sinatra singing Notorious B.I.G. lyrics over. The possibilities seem endless, but from a production standpoint, what are your thoughts on AI in music? Is that something you could see yourself utilizing?
Yeah, I think AI is interesting. Again, my view on AI is, it's almost, and I'm saying this in a positive way, it's just plagiarism. So it's just sampling. So it's just, it's doing what, all it is AI is being told to go find something, to go do something. So let's say, for instance, I want to make an Eminem record, okay, or I need to find an Eminem sound. How do we recreate that? Well, we all know computers are intelligent enough to go and recreate that. Now, there's enough content on the internet as well with deep fake and everything like that. You can literally somebody could make this conversation completely different due to there's enough words on the internet of your voice, and there's enough words on the internet with my voice that they could have two completely different conversations, and we could be saying some different shit. So, but realistically, what AI can't do is be in the mind of a creative and create something that hasn't been created before from something that isn't online already. And that's the thing that excites me. AI can't make a new Eminem. AI can recreate Eminem. I don't know if you've heard the AI Oasis album. Absolutely amazing. Like, it's unbelievable. But if AI created that and it wasn't Oasis, would I care about it? No, because I love Oasis. Could AI create Elvis Presley again? They could recreate Elvis Presley, but it wouldn't be Elvis Presley because we know Elvis Presley, right? So it's not going to be like, oh, here's the new Elvis Presley. It's like, well, it's Elvis Presley from the past, but just recreated. So that's the thing for me is AI. I'm not worried about AI. I think it's great for what you can do tool wise, but it's just realistically glorifying making samples again, which I think is interesting. However, there is a level of, on an artist side of things, with a paywall, like if you're recreating Eminem, if you're recreating whoever you're recreating, how does that person get paid?
That's an amazing question. That's something I don't think there's an answer for, and I think it could keep lawyers busy for a long time. So David Guetta, for example, the beat that he played out, he can't release that, right? No. Because there's all sorts of copyright infringement and things that they're going to run into. So yes, if you're recreating another artist's voice, I think, in terms of a full proper release, I don't know that that's possible, but for use in a festival setting, for use in a club setting, I think there's opportunity for that. But then you get an artist like Grimes, who I think is actually using, an AI of herself, right? So, I think the possibilities are certainly endless. And then you look at how, maybe it's not AI, but how technology is impacting performance. Look at what ABBA is doing. I'm sure you've seen in London, right? Where they use this incredible technology. They created avatars of themselves, as they call it. And it's the four of them as they looked in, let's say, 1977. Yeah. And they're selling out an arena every night, giving people that nostalgia trip, and celebrities are going out to see that. And from what I understand, they're going to be taking this, worldwide. Las Vegas is mentioned, other cities. But, what about the possibilities of future performance? You could be sitting at home in your living room, and you can put a hologram of yourself on the stage at Movement Festival in Detroit. And, it's just things that you can think about. You can bring back a dead artist. We can have DJ AM. We can have Avicii doing sets at festivals through the magic of technology. So you talk about how, the industry has changed a little bit. I think these are things we may see. Artists are already experimenting with it. I think we may see more, going on in the future. But dance artists, I find, are usually on the cutting edge of technology, and they're the first ones to try to experiment with this new stuff, because I guess a lot of what is being done is computer based. Yeah. And it is interesting for me to watch and see what people are coming up with. I did a podcast at one point that was called Crypto on the Beat, and I was talking to a lot of artists about just this and the new technology. And at one point it was the metaverse, and NFTs were, the thing about a year and a half ago. And it's just, the world's moving fast, and it's like you almost have to keep up with this stuff. Otherwise, you'll end up being that, a guy sitting on your lawn, that old grandpa telling the little kids to get off with all their new technology, because a lot's happening in a pretty short period of time, especially in our universe.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely an interesting time. And if you think from, when was the first iPhone?
Early 2000,
2006, 2006, 2005, maybe?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Like, if you think how quickly the world has changed since then, and to what we're walking around with now and the power we have. I am a huge believer, though, is that in-person concerts will never end.
Amen.
I don't think it's. I don't think that will ever change, and I hope it doesn't. And that's not me being selfish, because that's what I do. But I think there's no better thing than being in a concert venue and watching an artist perform, especially a singer, especially somebody playing an instrument. I think there's a level of talent that you can have the avatars, and you can have all of that, and you can do all of that, and it can be just as good. But there's something that's like just a connection between one person and another. Whether, like, I'm sure you have it when you're playing your corporate shows, but like even for me when I'm playing, you have that eye contact with somebody in the crowd. That will never happen with computer. Like, you'll never have that eye connection where you both know what you're both thinking, but you don't have to say anything. And maybe you do. Maybe there is a future with that, and I'm all open to that. But I do believe that we're definitely not there yet. And I feel like human connection is something that can't ever be recreated with AI as a performance.
I agree. And from a fan's perspective too, I mean, if people are listening to this and maybe haven't been out to a show, I mean, there's nothing that can recreate, the feeling of being in the middle of a crowd,
exactly,
seeing your favorite artist, singing along to the song, or, just hands in the air, just that adrenaline rush. And there's nothing like that. But, I think there's room for both though, because I also think that, maybe somebody financially they can't afford to go to the show, or maybe they live in an area where that show is not coming to them. So I think there's definitely there is room, I think, for both, and I think we'll see in the future more development around things like that. But hands down, you have the opportunity to go to a live show, a live festival. I mean, if you're a fan of music, I mean, there's not much that's going to equal the feeling that you're going to have at that show, or with that experience, especially if it's at an incredible destination, if it's Las Vegas, if it's watching the sunset in Ibiza, listening to a DJ play. Like, you're not going to get that, of course, staying at home watching the highlights on Instagram, if you will.
No, I agree. I also think there is almost like I'm sure it's happened, I think it is, but I know during COVID, when we were in the streaming world and kind of there was a lot more people streaming, doing live performances and things like that, I do feel like there's a way to turn that into the business now, where you have your show and you can buy tickets to go to the show, or you can buy tickets for the stream. And I really like that concept, and no one's really done it. I'm surprised like the Taylor Swifts and the Drakes and the Weekends aren't doing this, because they have the ability to make a production, to make an experience on the screen as good as, well, not as good, but like production levels as high as what it could be in person. And also the revenue could be absolutely insane. If your ticket is $150 to go and see you play, and you do a $20 ticket to see you live stream, imagine the amount of people that are going to live stream that as well. Could be interesting.
It's an incredible point. I remember that happening during the pandemic, and I think Tomorrowland even did a festival where you could buy the tickets and it was virtual. And I did think we were going to see more of that coming out of the pandemic. And somebody like Taylor Swift, for example, I mean, maybe the fear is that people would then pay the $20 to watch the stream and think, oh, I don't need to pay the, whatever it is to go see the show. But, in somebody like her case, where every show was sold out for months in advance and you couldn't sniff a ticket, the additional revenue that you could have made by streaming it online. I see that maybe, there's some artist management, in your future or something like that, because that is something I thought we would see more of coming out of the pandemic. And I feel like people have maybe done that less and gone away from it. And that does surprise me, because it seemed like that was a very viable business model.
Yeah. Do you like taking the radio station to shows? Do you enjoy that whole process?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To broadcast live from these festivals, I think is some of the best of what we do.
Yeah.
For the listeners, I know, they get an opportunity if they can't travel to Miami to be at Ultra, they can listen to us for that weekend and almost, feel like they're there,
Yeah.
and they can follow along on our social media and see, what they're missing. I think that's one of the best, things that we do. Going to Las Vegas and EDC, and we did Coachella, several times also, and having a presence there is it's great for us, obviously, but I think that to me is what the fans look to us for. You talked earlier about getting that content that you can't get from a streaming platform.
Yeah.
I mean, that's A1 right there.
100%.
And being able to interview an artist minutes before they do a set, or right after they come off stage, like, Swedish House Mafia closed Ultra back in March, and 10 minutes later, I'm sitting in the room with them just after they came off, and you can hear in their voices, like, what that felt like, to be standing in front of 50,000 people closing a festival. So I think that's some of the best things that we do is being able to bring a live event like that to dance fans. And the feedback when we do stuff like that is always tremendous, because they're taking the festival with them to their road trip to the lake, or they're staying at home doing nothing, and they're just listening to sets all weekend, and they're having the time of their lives. And as somebody who enjoys that two-way communication with the audience, like, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's super important, and it goes back to people that can't be at the experience to be able to experience it, and also some people that probably will never want to experience it, but they like listening to it through the radio. It's completely different. I remember listening to certain things with Radio 1. Is like, I would never buy a ticket to go to that festival or that party, but I love to experience it. Glastonbury Festival is a huge festival in the UK, I'm sure you're aware, but like the BBC do an amazing coverage, and like when I don't get the chance to go, like I go and watch it back, because the BBC do such a great job at covering that festival, which is such an iconic festival. It's the same with the EDC here. It's the same with Ultra. It's like a lot of people don't get the opportunity to go to these festivals, and it's amazing that you guys can kind of give that support of the festival to your listeners, and I guess that's what they pay for at the end of the day.
For sure. I think the first ones that we were doing, and to see how it's changed. I mean, take Electric Zoo, for example. We've done that festival every year. That's a big one for those who may not know. Happens Labor Day weekend at Randall's Island in New York City. I think the first one I want to say was back in like 2009. And I remember Cascade, for example, playing that one, and he was like, the stage setup, the production was so minimal. Compared to what these things are now. And he was standing on a table that may have well been somebody's kitchen table in their home, and he's like clapping along to Angel on My Shoulder. But it was a great thing, because the community that was we loved that, and we loved him and the music. But now these stages at these festivals are like just larger than life, and the food trucks, and it's like the experience has come such a long way. And same thing with Ultra. I think the first one that we did, first one that I was at, I think they did a couple before I started going down with them, but it was the first year that Swedish House Mafia had come together and played Ultra. And, just to be a part of that. That was, I think, my first ever festival experience. And I would encourage anybody who's, maybe listening to this, who's never had the opportunity to go to a festival, especially an iconic one. If you are able to do it, and you're a fan of really any style of music, but especially dance, just go, because it's like nothing you've ever experienced before, being around like-minded people, and being able to see so many artists in the course of a weekend. It'll be life-changing. And I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, I agree totally. With regards to your shows on Sirius, have you been running BPM, and how long have you been doing the Studio 54 and BPM? Has it been the whole 20 years you've been at Sirius, or have your shows kind of changed over the years?
So I've pretty much always had a show on the contemporary dance channel. So when
Yeah.
I first started, it was Sirius. I mentioned earlier the Sirius and the XM were
Yeah.
two separate entities. So I was on Sirius 36, The Beat.
Yeah.
And we went after the merger. It was BPM was the dance channel. So I then had a show there. So I've been with the current dance music for all along. I had a show on Utopia at one point, which is our 90s and 2000s dance channel,
Yeah.
which was really cool. Amber, Jocelyn Enriquez, early Tiesto, early Armin,
Yeah.
artists like that, Real McCoy, Ace of Base. And then more recently, I've done Studio 54, which was a little bit of a challenge for me because, I didn't grow up in that era, but I always loved the music.
Yeah.
But it's given me an opportunity because I'm such a fan of dance and I feel like I'm knowledgeable about it. This was an area that maybe I didn't know as much about. And it gave me an opportunity to learn more about it and to be able to talk about Donna Summer. And to me, in many ways, it helps me understand how we got to where we are today, to kind of go all the way back to the beginning and to have that education as well. And you realize, somebody like Nile Rodgers, for example, and Chic, who are still, he's so relevant today, but the things that he was doing back in the late 1970s. And, you really get an education on how dance music, started and how it got from there to here. And it's been really cool to be on channels that kind of specialize in the different eras of dance, because I think there's some exciting music in all of those different decades.
Yeah, totally. And I bet you see the crossover in all of them.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
But it also makes you appreciate, though, the people who have that longevity, because I think that's
100%.
something that today is a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because the industry is so much more song driven today, I think, than artist driven.
Yeah.
And you look at someone like Nile, even Madonna, for example, has been around for so long, and that's something that not many people can successfully do. You look at dance music, like longevity. There's probably a handful of people who have been at it for, I want to say, 20 pushing 30 years. Daft Punk did it for almost 30 years, iconic. I guess, you look at Armin, you look at guys like Tiesto, guys like Cascade. That's it's not so easy to have that longevity. And especially in today's universe when people are just on to the next thing so quickly.
Yeah, it must be tough. Also, with radio, how do you create longevity?
As an artist, or are you saying as somebody who talks on the air?
As an artist, for somebody that from your perspective, as a radio DJ, how does an artist, because you see this all the time, you see artists come and go, and you see people have their fame, 5 minutes of fame, and then never around again. But you also see artists that have been there from the get-go and keep going and keep going. What do you think that is? How do you think people stay relevant?
So, it's a very good question. You can kind of see early on, people who are, kind of in this for the right reasons. And then you can see maybe some people are in it for, maybe different reasons. They just want to get paid, or they just think it's a lifestyle thing, and then they're going to party and then they burn out. But I think one of the most important things is being authentic and staying true to your sound and not trying to chase after, the flavor of the moment, in terms of whether it's, hey, you came up doing progressive house and now all of a sudden you're doing dubstep and then you're doing future bass. And I think that that's a way to maybe lose your fans, because they don't look at you as having an authentic sound. I think they want to listen to a Will Clarke song and kind of know what they're going to get when they listen to that song. I think that's important. I think honestly, more than ever today also is, if you're putting out the right kind of music, the lifestyle. I've seen a lot of people get run into the ground, and we saw it end tragically for some, but I think whether it's doing it completely sober or just kind of just managing the schedule is so important for people. And I've a lot of artists that we talk to, it's changed since the pandemic, where they went from doing, 300 shows a year and being on, 280 flights to, maybe managing their time a little bit better. So they have the energy and the clear mind to get in the studio and create better music or create, more focused music. I think those two things are very, very important. But it really becomes very challenging though in this universe, especially the songs are getting shorter, and social media has played a big part on that with TikTok. And sometimes you don't even need a full song. It's 30 seconds worth. That's all you need, and to get the song played on the radio. And it's just a fast moving environment for artists at this point. But I think staying true to your sound and having a sound that people can relate to, and just managing your lifestyle and having the right people around you, I think is also important as well. But because it's very easy to get burned out, as I'm sure you're aware. In this lifestyle.
How do you with your shows, is there ever conversations on artist development and how to kind of develop artists through the industry of radio? So say, for instance, you have, like with new artists that come through, is there conversations of like, okay, this person's going to be doing this, this, and this over the next year, we can get behind this person? Or is it purely just song based?
For what we're doing, I would say on BPM, especially Studio 54, but it's more song based. We do have a new music show on BPM called Beta BPM, but that also primarily is song based. But we have broken new artists on the channel before, but just in terms of like giving an avenue to maybe an unsigned artist or things like that. The new music show Beta BPM would maybe do a little bit of that, but a lot of those conversations tend to take place kind of off air, if you will. That's a great point that you bring up. I know there probably are some shows in some places that people do where they feature unsigned artists, and there's a lot of things I'm seeing online these days as well, where you have a panel of people and you rate the song hot or not, and some of them are industry executives. But as far as like that having a platform with us, that's not something that we've done just yet.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, isn't it? Because radio is still a business at the end of the day, and radio, you have to perform to your payer, to your customers, which are the people that pay the subscription. So there's also a level of like, well, you have to give what the customer wants to a certain extent. And there's a line, right? There's still a line where you're not going to have to give them all that they want, but you give them 90% of what they want, and 10% can be artistically. It's very similar when it comes to DJing a show. It's like you can self-indulge as an artist for like a small part of that show, but majority of that show, you have to give them what they think they want, or what you think they want, to give them the best time. It must be quite an interesting line to walk with radio as well.
Yeah, it is. But like you're saying, people are turning it on and they're expecting to hear, we're going to introduce them to the popular dance songs of the day.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times that'll be from a familiar artist. Sometimes it won't. I mean, we'll certainly play a new artist, maybe, a song broke on TikTok, for example, or, if a label has a priority with a new artist and the song is worthy of playing on the radio, certainly it'll get played. But, the opportunity for an unsigned artist, a lot of that, does happen behind the scenes, if you will.
Amazing. Let's wrap this up. We've just done an hour and 10 minutes. Couple last things. How can people listen to you? What shows are you on? I know we've spoke about it, but just to wrap that up, how can people listen to you on Sirius XM?
Yeah, of course. You can hear me regularly on BPM, which is channel 51, playing the popular dance music of the day. You can find me on social media, of course, to talk about any of that. It's at Valentino SXM. You can also hear me on Studio 54, hosting the new Disco Hour show, which you can listen to on demand on our podcast. On demand on our app, the SXM app. And that, just kind of focusing on the modern music that's been inspired by the sounds of the 70s and 80s, which is fun. There's some podcast episodes I mentioned earlier you can listen to, also Crypto on the Beat, which you can find, anywhere that you get your normal podcasts. And maybe, I'll see you out at one of these events showing off my DJ skills, maybe Consumer Electronics Show or New York Auto Show. And, I'm sure you're not going to lose any sleep at night about, what I'm doing there. But it's just fun for me. I taught myself to DJ during the pandemic because I think everybody assumed that I knew how to do it. So I had a little extra time, and I enjoy it. So that's fun for me.
Amazing. That's the main thing. Danny, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. And I'll hopefully catch you next time in New York.
Yeah, look forward to it, man. Thanks so much for having me on, and definitely enjoyed the chat.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
You got it.
And that's a wrap. Big love to everybody for listening. Big love to Danny for coming on. Really enjoyed that conversation. Hope you did. If you did, please share, please subscribe. And I will catch you next time.